Derek tossed the divorce papers onto the scratched oak dining table, adjusting his new Rolex, a gift from the woman waiting for him in the idling Mercedes outside. "I'm sorry, Gabrielle, but I've outgrown this." "I've outgrown you," he said, his eyes dripping with pity as he took in her faded grey cardigan. "Victoria can give me the life I deserve. She's bringing me into the elite circle at Vanguard." Gabrielle stared at the documents, biting the inside of her cheek to hide a razor-sharp smile. Derek was dumping her for a wealthy executive at his company, a company that, unbeknownst to him, Gabrielle owned outright. The alarm clock on Derek's side of the bed blared at exactly 5:30 a.m., a sharp, aggressive sound that perfectly matched his driving ambition. He slapped it off, groaning as he rolled out from beneath the sensible cotton sheets. Across the mattress, his wife, Gabrielle, merely stirred, pulling the duvet over her messy chestnut hair. To Derek, Gabrielle was the epitome of stagnation. When they had met at Northwestern University 7 years ago, her lack of pretension had been charming. She was an art history major who wore thrifted sweaters and drank black coffee. Derek, a fiercely competitive business major from a working-class family in Ohio, had liked that she didn't demand expensive dinners or designer bags. She was a safe, comfortable harbor while he built his ship. But now, at 32, Derek felt that his ship was ready to conquer the ocean, and Gabrielle was the anchor dragging him down. He walked into the bathroom of their modest 3-bedroom home in Evanston, Illinois, and turned on the shower, wincing at the slightly temperamental water pressure. He was a senior project manager at Vanguard Holdings, one of the most aggressive and rapidly expanding commercial real estate and tech investment firms in the Midwest. He wore tailored suits, networked with millionaires, and spent his days in glass-walled boardrooms overlooking the Chicago skyline. When he walked out of the bathroom, freshly shaven and smelling of expensive cologne, Gabrielle was in the kitchen. She was wearing a pair of worn-out yoga pants and an oversized university sweatshirt, pouring water into a standard drip coffee maker. "Morning," she said, offering a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The emotional distance between them had been growing for over a year. "I need to be at the office by 7, Derek said curtly, checking his phone. "Richard Hughes is flying in from the New York office. The CEO doesn't just show up for nothing. We're acquiring the Harrison building, and I need to make sure my team's projections are flawless." "That sounds like a big opportunity," Gabrielle said, leaning against the counter. "Just don't burn yourself out, Derek. You worked until 10 last night." Derek scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Someone has to pull the weight, Gabrielle. We can't all just sit at home doing freelance accounting for small businesses. Some of us are trying to build a future." Gabrielle looked down at her coffee mug, hiding her expression. "I bring in my share." "Your share barely covers the property tax and the groceries," he muttered, grabbing his leather briefcase. "I'll be home late. Don't wait up." When the front door clicked shut, the heavy silence of the house settled around Gabrielle. She waited exactly 2 minutes, watching from the window as Derek's Audi backed out of the driveway. As soon as his taillights disappeared around the corner, her entire demeanor shifted. The slumped, weary posture vanished. She walked into the spare bedroom, which Derek thought was just a cluttered storage space and occasional home office, and locked the door behind her. She opened her laptop, bypassed 3 levels of biometric security, and logged into a private server. Almost immediately, a video call notification popped up. She clicked Accept. The face of Richard Hughes, the 58-year-old CEO of Vanguard Holdings, filled the screen. He was sitting in the back of a black town car, navigating Chicago traffic. "Good morning, boss," Richard said, a wry smile lifting his mustache. "Morning, Richard," Gabrielle replied, her voice losing its soft, domestic lilt, replaced by a tone of absolute authority. "I assume you have the final draft of the Harrison acquisition contracts?" "I do. The board is ready to move forward, pending your final signature," Richard said. "Though I must say, It feels entirely ridiculous flying all the way to Chicago to pretend to run a company that you're managing from a suburb 20 miles away." Gabrielle sighed, leaning back in her ergonomic chair. "You know why we set it up this way, Richard. When I created Vanguard with the seed money from my first algorithm patent, I saw what sudden, massive wealth did to people. It ruined my parents. It ruined my first engagement. I wanted Derek to love me for me, not for a billion-dollar portfolio. I wanted us to build a normal life." "And how is that normal life working out?" Richard asked gently. He knew about the marital strain. "He's frustrated," Gabrielle admitted, rubbing her temples. "He thinks I lack ambition. He thinks I'm dead weight." "The irony is staggering," Richard chuckled dryly. "He's a mid-level manager, breaking his back to climb a corporate ladder that you literally built. Have you considered just telling him? If he knew his wife was the majority shareholder and silent founder of Vanguard, he'd probably worship the ground you walk on." "That's exactly what I don't want," Gabrielle said firmly. "I don't want a husband who worships my bank account. I want a partner." I've been quietly approving his bonuses, moving him up the chain, hoping financial security would make him relax. But it's just making him arrogant. "Well, his arrogance is about to be tested," Richard noted, glancing at a file on his lap. "We're bringing in a new vice president of acquisitions today. Victoria Kensington. Her father is Arthur Kensington, the British developer. She's got a fat Rolodex and a lot of flash. I'm assigning Derek to be her right-hand man to smooth over the transition." Gabrielle frowned slightly. She knew of Victoria Kensington. The woman was notorious in high society circles for being ruthless, incredibly glamorous, and chronically hungry for attention. "Keep an eye on that dynamic, Richard. Derek is easily blinded by shiny things." "Will do, Gabrielle. I'll send the contracts to your secure proxy." The call ended. Gabrielle looked at her screen, a sense of deep, gnawing unease settling in her stomach. She loved Derek. She had hidden her wealth to protect their love. But as she watched the ticker tape of her company's stock price scroll across her monitor, she wondered if her grand experiment in living a normal life was about to blow up in her face. Victoria Kensington was a hurricane, wrapped in a $1,000 silk trench coat. When she stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor of the Vanguard building, every head turned. She was tall, with sleek blonde hair cut into a sharp bob, wearing impossibly high Christian Louboutin heels that clicked menacingly against the Italian marble floors. She smelled of Tom Ford perfume and old money. Derek was standing near the reception desk when she arrived. He felt a sudden electric jolt of adrenaline just looking at her. This was the kind of woman he had always imagined associating with when he dreamed of success. She didn't look like Evanston. She looked like Manhattan, Monaco, and Dubai. Richard Hughes stepped out of his corner office to greet her. "Victoria, welcome to Vanguard." "Richard," she purred, kissing him on both cheeks. "Let's hope this Chicago branch isn't as dreadfully provincial as people say." "We do our best," Richard said smoothly. "Let me introduce you to your primary liaison. This is Derek Sterling, one of our top senior project managers. He knows the local market inside and out." Victoria turned her pale blue eyes onto Derek, assessing him from the cut of his suit to the polish on his shoes. Derek unconsciously stood taller, puffing out his chest. "Sterling," she said, tasting the name. "Well, Derek, I hope you have stamina. I don't work 9 to 5, and I don't tolerate mediocrity." "Neither do I, Miss Kensington," Derek replied, meeting her gaze with a confident smirk. Over the next 6 weeks, Derek's life became a whirlwind. He barely saw Gabriel. When he did come home, it was past midnight, and he was usually buzzing with the adrenaline of high-stakes negotiations and the expensive scotch Victoria favored. Victoria operated in a world Derek had only read about in Forbes. She took him to private, invitation-only clubs for client dinners that felt more like lavish parties. She drove a silver Mercedes-Benz G-Class and lived in a sprawling penthouse in the Gold Coast neighborhood. What Derek didn't know, what very few people knew, was that Victoria's wealth was largely a glittering facade. Her father, Arthur Kensington, had quietly cut her off 2 years prior after she squandered millions on failed fashion ventures and lavish vacations. Victoria was deeply in debt, leveraging her family name to maintain her lifestyle and secure high-paying corporate positions. She needed Vanguard to pay off, and she needed a devoted, capable man to do the actual heavy lifting while she took the credit. Derek was the perfect mark. He was smart, hard-working, and deeply insecure about his own status. One rainy Thursday evening, after successfully securing the zoning permits for the Harrison project, Victoria poured them both a glass of Macallan 25 in her penthouse. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the crystal decanter. "You're brilliant, Derek," Victoria said, handing him the glass. She let her fingers brush against his. "You did the work of 3 men this week. Richard is a fool for keeping you as a mere manager. You should be a director. You should be an executive." Derek took a slow sip, letting the warmth of the praise and the alcohol wash over him. "I'm pushing for it." "But corporate bureaucracy, it's not just bureaucracy," Victoria said softly, stepping closer. "It's your image. To be at the top, you have to look like you belong there. You have to live like it. Who is supporting you behind the scenes? Who is standing beside you at the galas?" Derek's mind immediately flashed to Gabrielle. Gabrielle, in her sweatpants, clipping coupons for the grocery store, asking him to fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. A wave of profound embarrassment washed over him. "My wife," Derek said, the word tasting bitter in his mouth, "doesn't understand this world. She's simple. She's happy with mediocrity." "How tragic," Victoria whispered, reaching up to adjust the lapel of his suit. "A man with your potential, chained to an anchor. You need an equal, Derek. Someone who can match your drive, someone who can open doors for you." She leaned in, and Derek didn't pull away. The kiss was fueled by ambition, greed, and the intoxicating illusion of power. From that night on, the affair was a roaring fire. Derek justified it to himself with ruthless corporate logic. Gabrielle was a bad investment. He had outgrown her. Victoria was a merger, an acquisition of a better life. He started spending his weekends at Victoria's penthouse, telling Gabrielle he had out-of-state conferences. He started buying more expensive clothes, charging them to a secret credit card, desperate to keep up with Victoria's aesthetic. Meanwhile, back in Evanston, Gabrielle watched the data. Through Vanguard's internal systems, which she monitored daily, she saw the exorbitant expense reports Victoria and Derek were filing. She saw the late-night car services to Victoria's address. But more painfully, she felt the absolute death of her marriage. Derek no longer looked at her. When he spoke to her, it was with thinly veiled contempt. He treated their home like a cheap hotel he was forced to stay in. Gabrielle hired a private investigator just to be certain. The photographs arrived via encrypted email 3 days later. Derek and Victoria, holding hands at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Derek kissing Victoria outside her apartment building. Gabrielle sat in the dark glow of her monitors, looking at the images. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up weeks ago, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. She had given Derek everything: a comfortable life, a secure job, quiet promotions, and her absolute loyalty. And he had thrown it away for the illusion of status. She picked up her phone and dialed her proxy. "Richard," Gabrielle said, her voice like cracking ice. "Gabrielle, I assume you've seen the reports?" "I've seen enough," she replied. "It's time to restructure. Let them think they're winning. Let Victoria push for his promotion. Give him enough rope, Richard." "And then?" Richard asked. "And then," Gabrielle said softly, looking at a framed photo of her and Derek from their college graduation, "I'm going to let him hang himself with it." 2 weeks later, Derek walked into the Evanston house on a Tuesday afternoon. He was wearing a brand new Brioni suit, his hair perfectly styled. He had a manila folder in his hand. He found Gabrielle in the dining room, sorting through the mail, wearing that same faded cardigan he had come to violently despise. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and threw the divorce papers onto the scratched oak table. "I'm sorry, Gabrielle, but I've outgrown this." "I've outgrown you," Derek said, his voice rehearsed and devoid of genuine warmth. He tapped the thick manila envelope against the scratched oak table. "Victoria can give me the life I deserve. She's bringing me into the elite circle at Vanguard. We're moving in together." Gabrielle looked from the envelope to Derek's face. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the ceramic coffee mug resting near her hand. Instead, she felt a profound, chilling calm wash over her. The man standing before her, preening in a suit she had indirectly paid for, reeking of an affair, was a stranger. "Divorce," Gabrielle stated, her voice perfectly level. "Just like that." "It's for the best," Derek insisted, mistaking her shock for submission. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of patronizing sympathy. "Look, I had my lawyer draft this to be as fair as possible. You keep this house. It's paid off, so you won't have to worry about a mortgage. You keep your little freelance accounting business and whatever sits in your personal checking account. I keep my Vanguard stock options, my 401k, and my salary. We walk away clean." Derek held his breath. He had been terrified she would fight him for spousal support, given the massive disparity in their apparent incomes. He had hidden thousands of dollars in bonuses in a separate account, just in case. Gabrielle picked up the document. She skimmed the pages, her mathematically trained mind instantly processing the pitiful settlement he was offering. He was leaving her a $300,000 house in Evanston, while keeping his mid-six-figure corporate assets. It was greedy. It was insulting. It was absolutely perfect. "You want me to sign this right now?" she asked softly. "If you don't mind." "Victoria is waiting in the car," he said, glancing at his Rolex. "We have a dinner reservation at Alinea to celebrate. Richard hinted at my promotion today." Gabrielle reached for a cheap ballpoint pen sitting in a cracked mug on the table. Without another word, she flipped to the back page and signed her name with a sharp, decisive flourish. Derek blinked, momentarily stunned. He had expected tears, begging, or at least an argument. "That's it?" "That's it, Derek," Gabrielle said, sliding the papers back across the table. "You have exactly 20 minutes to pack your things. Anything left behind goes in the dumpster tomorrow." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He hated when she gave him orders, but the victory was too sweet to jeopardize. He grabbed his pre-packed suitcases from the hallway closet, threw his keys on the counter, and walked out the door without looking back. When the silver Mercedes sped away, carrying her ex-husband into his self-made delusion, Gabrielle pulled out her phone. "Richard," she said when the proxy CEO answered, "the papers are signed. He's gone." "Are you all right, Gabrielle?" Richard asked, his tone softening with paternal concern. "I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I feel lighter than I have in years," she replied, walking into the kitchen to pour her cold coffee down the sink. "Let's proceed with phase 2. Give Derek the promotion. Make him director of Midwest Acquisitions. But structure his new contract carefully. I want his entire compensation package, base salary included, heavily leveraged against the success of the Harrison project." "A high-risk, high-reward structure," Richard noted. "Standard for cutthroat executives, but a tightrope walk if the project fails." "Exactly. And make sure Victoria Kensington remains his direct co-lead on Harrison. Let's see how well his new partner handles the pressure." Across town, Derek was uncorking a bottle of Dom Perignon in Victoria's sprawling Gold Coast penthouse. The city lights glittered below them, a sea of diamonds that Derek finally felt he owned. "To the new director," Victoria toasted, clinking her crystal flute against his. She was wearing a sheer silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. "I told you, darling, you just needed a woman who understood your trajectory." "I couldn't have done it without you," Derek said, pulling her close. Gabrielle signed the papers without a fight. She's completely clueless. Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Of course she is. Small-minded people never see the big picture. Now, about your new wardrobe. As a director, you can't be seen driving that leased Audi anymore. You need something European. And we have the Vanguard Gala coming up next month. I've already contacted a tailor in Milan for your tuxedo. Derek hesitated. His new salary was substantial, but his bank accounts were currently drained from the secret spending he'd done to court Victoria over the last 2 months. I might need to wait for my first director-level bonus to clear before I buy a new car, Vic. Victoria pouted, tracing a manicured nail down his chest. Derek, in our world, perception is reality. If you look like you're waiting for a paycheck, people treat you like an employee. If you look like you own the bank, they hand you the keys. Put it on credit. Leverage your new title. That's how wealth is built. Blinded by her glamour and terrified of losing her respect, Derek nodded. The next day, he financed a matte black Porsche Panamera at an extortionate interest rate. What Derek didn't know was that while he was financing cars to impress Victoria, Victoria was dodging phone calls from collection agencies. The penthouse they were drinking in was 3 months behind on rent. The designer clothes were bought on maxed-out credit cards secured by her father's long-revoked guarantor status. Victoria was a shark swimming in incredibly shallow water, and Derek was her new line of credit. 2 months into Derek's new life, the cracks in the glamorous facade began to spiderweb. His promotion to director had come with an enormous corner office and a crushing workload. The Harrison acquisition, a massive $300 million commercial real estate deal, was entirely on his shoulders. Victoria, who was supposed to be managing the international investors, was increasingly absent. She arrived at the office at 10, took 3-hour lunches, and left by 4, complaining of migraines that could only be cured by spa visits. Derek was drowning. He was working 14-hour days just to cover her end of the paperwork. Every time he tried to confront her, she manipulated him flawlessly. "Derek, darling, I'm the face of this operation," she would say, adjusting her Cartier bracelets. "I secure the relationships. You execute the details. That's why we're such a perfect team. You wouldn't want me to tell Richard you can't handle the pressure, would you?" Terrified of looking weak, Derek swallowed his exhaustion and worked harder. But the financial strain was becoming impossible to ignore. A week prior, Derek had accidentally opened a piece of mail at the penthouse. It was a final notice of eviction. When he confronted Victoria, she had burst into theatrical tears, claiming her corrupt wealth manager in London had frozen her trust fund assets in a petty legal dispute. "It's just a temporary cash flow issue, Derek," she had sobbed. "It will be cleared up in 30 days. But if I get evicted, the scandal will ruin my reputation. The investors will back out of the Harrison deal." Panicked at the thought of his flagship project collapsing, Derek had done the unthinkable. He had gone to a private, high-interest lender and taken out a $150,000 personal bridge loan, using his Vanguard stock options and his new contract as collateral. He paid her rent arrears and her outstanding credit card bills, convincing himself it was an investment in their future. He was entirely financially overextended. If the Harrison project failed, his contract stipulated he would forfeit his bonuses and face immediate termination with cause. He would lose everything. Meanwhile, Gabrielle was meticulously pulling the strings. She sat in her new, highly secured home office in Evanston, reviewing the data feeds. She saw the massive personal loan Derek had taken out. She saw the disastrously disorganized state of Victoria's investor portfolios. It was time to pull the trigger. She dialed Richard. "Good morning, Richard. How is our star director holding up?" "He looks like he hasn't slept in a week," Richard reported from his Chicago office. "Victoria is practically useless on the Harrison deal. She's alienated 2 of the primary Japanese investors with her arrogance. Derek is trying to patch the holes, but it's a sinking ship." "Perfect," Gabrielle said, her voice laced with cold satisfaction. "It's time for the Vanguard annual gala, and Richard, I think it's time the silent founder finally makes an appearance to address the board." Richard chuckled. "Are you sure, Gabrielle? You've guarded your anonymity fiercely for 5 years. I am sure. I want an independent, top-to-bottom audit of the Harrison project initiated immediately. Send the notice to Derek's desk this afternoon. Tell him the mysterious founder has personally requested it before they sign off on the final funding. He's going to panic. Let him." At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Derek was on his 4th espresso, aggressively typing an email to a furious investor, when his office door swung open. Richard Hughes walked in, his expression grim. He dropped a thick red folder on Derek's desk. "What's this?" Derek asked, his heart rate spiking. "A direct order from the top," Richard said quietly. "The silent founder is coming to the gala this Saturday. They are personally stepping out of the shadows, and before they do, they've ordered an immediate forensic audit of the Harrison acquisition." All the blood drained from Derek's face. "An audit?" "Richard, the deal is in a delicate phase. Victoria is still firming up the international commitments. If auditors start digging around, it's going to look like we lack confidence. It could spook the buyers." "Then you better make sure the books are flawless, Derek," Richard said, leaning over the desk. "Because if this audit finds that the project is mismanaged, the founder won't just fire you. They will trigger the penalty clauses in your contract. You'll be left with nothing." As Richard left the office, Derek felt a wave of pure nausea wash over him. He frantically dialed Victoria's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. He spent the next 3 days in a state of sheer terror, desperately trying to reconcile the files Victoria had neglected. The more he dug into her work, the more horrifying it became. Promises had been made to investors that Vanguard could never keep. Budgets were wildly inflated. Victoria hadn't just been lazy. She had been actively falsifying projections to make herself look better to the board. When Derek finally cornered her at the penthouse on Friday night, the eve of the gala, he was trembling with rage. "You lied to me!" Derek shouted, throwing a stack of printed emails onto her glass coffee table. "These international commitments are fake. You haven't spoken to the Tokyo Group in a month." Victoria, who was applying expensive serum to her face in the mirror, barely flinched. "Keep your voice down, Derek. I was going to secure them next week at the gala." "The gala is tomorrow, Victoria, and the founder is coming. They ordered an audit. Do you understand what this means? If this deal collapses, I lose my job, my stock, everything. And I'm $150,000 in debt because of your cash flow problem." Victoria turned around, her eyes turning cold and hard, the mask of the loving, supportive partner completely vanishing. "Then fix it, Derek. That's what you're good for, isn't it? You're a middle-class workhorse. I gave you the aesthetic. I gave you the connections. Now do the actual work." Derek stared at her, the horrific realization finally crashing down on him. She didn't love him. She didn't even respect him. He had abandoned a woman who had genuinely cared for him to become a glorified, debt-ridden assistant to a con artist. "I can't fix this, Victoria," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. "The audit is already happening. We're going to be exposed tomorrow night." Victoria sneered, turning back to the mirror. "Speak for yourself. My father knows half the board. I'll simply tell them you mismanaged the funds without my knowledge. You're the director, darling. The liability stops with you." Derek stumbled back, feeling like he had been punched in the stomach. He walked out of the penthouse, the silence of the elevator ride down to the lobby echoing along the total destruction of his life. He had traded everything for a shiny illusion, and now the bill was due. And tomorrow night at the gala, he would finally have to face the mysterious founder whose money he had wasted. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel smelled of white truffles, expensive orchids, and cold, hard capital. Waiters in starched white uniforms weaved through the crowd of Chicago's elite, carrying silver trays of caviar blinis and vintage champagne. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a glittering light over the attendees, illuminating a sea of Armani tuxedos and couture gowns. Derek stood near a towering ice sculpture, feeling like he was going to vomit. He was wearing the custom Milanese tuxedo Victoria had demanded he buy, putting another $8,000 on his already groaning credit cards. Underneath the finely spun Italian wool, he was sweating profusely. His heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against his ribs. The forensic audit of the Harrison acquisition had concluded at 5 p.m. that afternoon. The lead auditor from Ernst & Young had walked out of the Vanguard offices without saying a single word to him, carrying a locked briefcase. Victoria was 10 feet away, holding court with 2 senior partners from Goldman Sachs. She wore a stunning, backless silver gown, laughing brightly and touching the arm of the older partner. She had completely frozen Derek out since their argument the night before. Whenever he tried to approach her, she turned her shoulder, effectively rendering him invisible. She was already positioning herself for survival, ready to detach from him the moment the axe fell. "Nervous, Derek?" a smooth voice asked. Derek jumped, spilling a drop of his martini onto his cuff. Richard Hughes was standing beside him, nursing a glass of sparkling water. The older man looked impeccably calm, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "Just anticipating the founder's speech, Richard," Derek lied, his voice tight. "It's a big night for the firm." "A monumental night," Richard agreed, a strange, knowing smile playing on his lips. The board has been practically vibrating with curiosity. It's not every day a shadow billionaire decides to step into the light, especially one who just ordered a top-to-bottom scrub of our flagship acquisition. Derek swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Did the auditors give you any preliminary findings?" "Oh, they gave me the final report an hour ago," Richard said casually, though his eyes were sharp. "I handed it directly to the founder. Let's just say, the numbers on the international commitments were illuminating." Before Derek could ask another panicked question, the jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of 100 overlapping conversations faded into an expectant silence as the ballroom lights dimmed. A single spotlight snapped on, illuminating the heavy mahogany podium at the front of the stage. Richard patted Derek's shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a priest administering last rites, and walked up the short flight of stairs to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners, and friends of Vanguard Holdings," Richard began, his voice echoing through the cavernous room. "For 5 years, this company has operated on a simple principle: ruthless efficiency paired with quiet innovation. We have disrupted the commercial real estate market and cornered the tech investment sector in the Midwest. But the architect of that success has always chosen to lead from the background. The crowd was dead silent. Derek felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. "Tonight," Richard continued, "that changes. The visionary who wrote the core algorithms that built our fortune, the majority shareholder, and the true CEO of Vanguard Holdings, has decided it is time to personally address the future of this firm. Please welcome her to the stage." "Her," a murmur rippled through the crowd. Derek blinked, mildly surprised. He had always assumed the founder was a reclusive tech bro or an eccentric older tycoon. The heavy velvet curtains behind the podium parted. The spotlight shifted, catching the unmistakable glint of a blinding, multi-carat diamond necklace. A woman stepped out from the shadows. She was wearing a breathtaking, sleek, emerald green Alexander McQueen gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Her chestnut hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was styled in cascading, glossy waves. Her posture was flawless, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying power. She stepped up to the microphone, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the crowd. Derek's breath caught in his throat, his brain short-circuited. He blinked once, twice, violently rubbing his eyes, completely disregarding the expensive tuxedo sleeve. It couldn't be. The lighting was playing tricks on him. He was hallucinating from the stress. But as she leaned into the microphone, a cool, familiar smile touched her lips. "Good evening," Gabrielle said. The voice was the same one that used to ask him to take out the trash in Evanston. It was the same voice he had dismissed as simple, uninspired, and stagnant just 3 months ago. Only now it echoed with the authority of a billionaire. Derek staggered backward, his heel catching the edge of the ice sculpture's base. He gripped a cocktail table to keep from collapsing. His vision tunneled. Gabrielle, his ex-wife. The woman he had dumped for a rich executive. The woman he had left with nothing but a modest suburban house. She was the founder of Vanguard. She owned the company. She owned him. Across the room, Victoria stopped laughing. Her pale blue eyes widened in shock as she stared at the stage, then her gaze whipped toward Derek, her face draining of all color. "For years," Gabrielle's voice rang out, clear and steady, "I believed that the strength of Vanguard lay in its anonymity. But recent internal developments have reminded me that leadership requires visibility. It requires accountability. Over the past few months, we have engaged in a massive undertaking, the Harrison acquisition." Derek felt his chest constrict. He couldn't breathe. "However," Gabrielle continued, her eyes locking directly onto Derek across the sprawling ballroom. Her gaze was like a sniper's laser. "An enterprise is only as strong as its weakest link, and when ambition outpaces integrity, the entire structure is compromised. The forensic audit of the Harrison project concluded today, and the results are unacceptable." The ballroom erupted into shocked whispers. A public execution was happening, and nobody knew who was on the chopping block, except Derek. "Richard," Gabrielle said, turning slightly, "please ensure the board receives the physical copies of the audit. I will be handling the restructuring of the acquisitions department personally, starting right now." She stepped away from the podium, the spotlight following her as she descended the stairs. She didn't mingle. She didn't stop to shake hands. Accompanied by 2 massive private security contractors, she walked straight towards the heavily guarded VIP suite off the main floor. Before the heavy oak doors closed behind her, she paused, looking directly at Derek and Victoria. "Mr. Sterling." "Miss Kensington," Gabrielle called out, her voice cutting through the murmuring crowd like a serrated blade. "My office. Now." The Gold Coast room was a private enclave designed for billion-dollar handshakes, featuring leather armchairs, a private bar, and soundproof walls. Right now, it felt like an interrogation cell. Derek's legs were practically numb as he walked through the doors. Victoria trailed behind him, her usual predatory confidence completely shattered. She looked small, clutching her silver clutch like a shield. Gabrielle was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a thick red folder resting in front of her. Richard Hughes stood to her right, his arms crossed. "Close the door," Gabrielle ordered. Derek pushed the heavy oak doors shut. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He turned to face his ex-wife, his mind desperately trying to reconcile the woman in the emerald gown with the woman in the faded cardigan. "Gabrielle, Derek choked out, his voice trembling. "I don't understand. How—" "You don't need to understand my financial portfolio, Derek," Gabrielle interrupted, her voice entirely stripped of emotion. It wasn't angry, it was clinical, which was infinitely worse. "You only need to understand yours. Sit down." Derek collapsed into one of the leather chairs. Victoria remained standing, her eyes darting nervously between Gabrielle and Richard. "Let's start with you, Victoria," Gabrielle said, flipping open the red folder. "According to the Ernst & Young audit, 80% of the international investor commitments you filed for the Harrison project are fraudulent. The Tokyo Group pulled out 6 weeks ago. The London syndicate never even signed a letter of intent. You fabricated emails and forged digital signatures to inflate your progress reports." Victoria's face flushed an ugly shade of red. "That is a lie. I have been working tirelessly." "Save the performance," Gabrielle snapped, pulling out a secondary file. "I know about the $150,000 you owe to creditors. I know your father, Arthur, formally severed your trust fund 2 years ago. I know you're currently facing eviction from your Gold Coast penthouse. You aren't a high-powered executive, Victoria. You're a high-end grifter." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The absolute certainty in Gabrielle Taylor's eyes demolished whatever lies she had prepared. "You targeted my company for a quick payday," Gabrielle continued relentlessly. "And when you realized you couldn't actually do the work required, you targeted an insecure, easily manipulated middle manager to do it for you." Gabrielle slowly turned her gaze to Derek. "Isn't that right, Derek?" Derek flinched as if he had been struck. "Gabrielle, please. She manipulated me. She lied to me about everything. I thought we were building a future. Gabrielle let out a short, hollow laugh. "You traded a loyal wife and a secure life for a woman who used you as a human credit card. Did you really think you earned that director position because of your stellar performance? I handed it to you. I gave you the title, the contract, and enough rope to hang yourself, and you sprinted towards the gallows." Derek stared at her, the horrific pieces falling into place. You knew. You gave me the promotion, knowing I would fail." "I gave you exactly what you asked for," Gabrielle corrected coldly. "You wanted to be in the elite circle. You wanted high stakes. The contract you signed stated that if the Harrison project failed due to gross negligence, you would forfeit all Vanguard stock, your bonuses, and face immediate termination with cause, which means you leave this company with absolutely nothing." "You can't do this," Derek pleaded, tears of genuine panic welling in his eyes. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of her desk. "Gabrielle, I'm $150,000 in debt. I took out a bridge loan against my stock to pay her rent. I financed a Porsche. If you fire me, I'm bankrupt. I'll lose everything." Gabrielle looked down at his white-knuckled hands gripping her desk, then back up to his desperate, tear-streaked face. There was a time, not so long ago, when seeing him cry would have broken her heart. Now she felt absolutely nothing. "You already threw everything away, Derek," she said softly. "You threw it away on our dining room table for a woman who doesn't even have her own bank account." Gabrielle looked up at Richard. "Call security. Have Miss Kensington escorted from the premises immediately. Our legal department will be filing civil charges against her for corporate fraud and forgery on Monday." Victoria let out a sharp gasp. "You can't prove I forged those documents. I literally wrote the security algorithms for our server network. Victoria," Gabrielle said deadpan. "I have the IP logs of every keystroke you made. Get out of my building." Two towering security guards immediately stepped into the room. Victoria, realizing the game was entirely up, didn't fight. She shot one last venomous look at Derek, the mark who had failed her, and marched out the door, her heels clicking a desperate retreat. Derek was left alone with Gabrielle and Richard. He slid off the chair, sinking to his knees on the plush carpet. "Gabrielle, I'm begging you," Derek sobbed, all of his arrogant pride evaporating. "I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. I was blinded by the money, by the lifestyle. But I loved you. I still love you. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll step down to a junior role. Just don't destroy me." Gabrielle stood up. She walked around the mahogany desk and looked down at the man who had been her husband. He looked pathetic, kneeling in his expensive, unpaid-for tuxedo, begging the woman he had discarded for mercy. "You didn't love me, Derek. You loved what I provided. And when you thought someone else could provide more, you threw me away like garbage," Gabrielle said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You wanted a rich woman. Congratulations. You found one. She was just sitting right in front of you the whole time." Gabrielle turned her back on him, walking towards the private exit that led to the upper executive suites. "Your corporate badge has been deactivated," she called over her shoulder. "Your final, pro-rated paycheck for base hours will be mailed to whatever address you can afford now. Goodbye, Derek." As the door clicked shut behind her, leaving Derek kneeling in the silence of his total ruin, Richard Hughes walked over and dropped a single sheet of paper onto the floor in front of him. It was a formal termination notice. "You have 5 minutes to vacate the property, Mr. Sterling," Richard said coldly, "or I'll let the guards physically remove you." Monday morning hit Derek like a runaway freight train. He woke up not in the Egyptian cotton sheets of the Gold Coast penthouse, but shivering violently in the driver's seat of the matte black Porsche Panamera, parked in a stark, fluorescent-lit Walmart parking lot in Skokie. His custom Milanese tuxedo, now hopelessly wrinkled and smelling of stale sweat and profound regret, clung to his frame. When he had attempted to return to Victoria's building after the catastrophic gala, the night doorman, acting on Victoria's frantic, aggressive orders right before she fled the premises, had physically barred his entry. His security keycard was deactivated. His designer clothes, his laptop, and the few possessions he hadn't already abandoned at Gabrielle's house in Evanston were locked away behind impenetrable glass doors. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking. His banking application displayed a horrifying, undeniable reality. The $150,000 personal bridge loan from Sterling Credit Union was demanding its first brutal interest payment. His primary checking account held exactly $412. His Vanguard stock options, which had always been his ultimate financial safety net, were legally vaporized the very second Richard Hughes handed him the termination papers. Desperation clawing at his throat, Derek drove to the luxury European dealership in Naperville, where he had financed the Porsche just weeks prior. He walked into the pristine showroom looking like a deranged, hungover groomsman and practically begged the general manager to take the vehicle back. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said, a mixture of stark pity and corporate disdain in his eyes as he looked over the financing contract. "You drove it off the lot. The depreciation alone is 30%. Even if we process a voluntary repossession today to save you the tow fee, you are still entirely on the hook for the negative equity. That's nearly $40,000 you owe us, effective immediately." Derek stumbled out of the dealership, leaving the heavy key fob on the manager's immaculate desk. He had no car, he had no job, he had a mountain of toxic debt that was mathematically impossible to climb without a massive 6-figure salary. He tried to call Victoria. The number was permanently disconnected. Through frantic, humiliating searches on LinkedIn and social media, he eventually uncovered the grim truth from a mutual acquaintance at Goldman Sachs. Victoria Kensington had fled Chicago entirely on Sunday morning. She had boarded a first-class flight to London, dodging the impending civil fraud charges Gabrielle had promised, leaving the eviction notice, the damaged penthouse, and Derek entirely behind. She was a ghost, and Derek was the corpse she had left in her wake. By Wednesday, Derek's reality had completely and utterly collapsed. He moved into a dingy $60 a night motel off Interstate 290. He spent his days sitting on a stained, sagging mattress, scrolling through corporate job boards. But the commercial real estate world in Chicago was an incredibly tight-knit community. Word of his catastrophic failure at Vanguard Holdings, his deep involvement in the fraudulent Harrison acquisition, and his brutal public firing had spread like wildfire. He wasn't just unemployed, he was radioactive. Elite recruiters stopped returning his calls. Former colleagues blocked his number entirely. To simply survive, Derek had to swallow every single ounce of the arrogance that had once defined him. The man who had sneered at Gabrielle's freelance accounting, who had worn imported suits and drank Macallan 25, was now standing in line at a temp agency in the pouring rain. His first assignment was a graveyard shift data entry position for a mid-level logistics firm in the deep suburbs, a job that paid less in a week than what he used to spend on a single dinner date with Victoria. Every time he looked at his meager paycheck, a massive portion was immediately garnished to satisfy the aggressive collection agencies hunting him down for the bridge loan and the luxury credit cards. He was trapped in a financial prison of his own meticulous design. Every late-night shift, every instant ramen dinner, was a brutal, agonizing reminder of the warm, comfortable home he had thrown away. He had wanted the elite circle, and he had gotten it, only to be chewed up and spat out by a game he never truly understood. Across the city, in the soaring, sunlit glass towers of Vanguard Holdings, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The Phantom founder was a phantom no more. Gabrielle sat at the head of the massive, granite-topped conference table in the executive boardroom. She was no longer wearing the faded cardigans and yoga pants that Derek had so thoroughly despised. She wore a sharp-tailored navy blue blazer from Chanel and a crisp white silk blouse. Her presence commanded the room not through volume, but through absolute, unquestionable competence. Richard Hughes sat to her right, presenting the restructured financial projections for the upcoming quarter. With the Harrison deal officially scrapped and the fraudulent international commitments purged from our ledgers, Richard explained to the newly assembled board of directors, "Our liquidity has actually improved. We dodged a $300 million bullet." "We didn't just dodge it, Richard. We dismantled the gun," Gabrielle said calmly, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Vanguard will no longer tolerate the kind of superficial, aggressive expansion that invites parasites like Victoria Kensington into our ecosystem. From now on, our acquisitions will be grounded in verified data, not cocktail party promises. I built this company on solid mathematics. We are returning to those roots." The board members nodded in unison. There was a palpable sense of profound relief and deep respect in the room. The transition from a silent, coding genius to a highly visible, commanding CEO had been seamless. Gabrielle wasn't just a figurehead. She was a force of nature. After the meeting adjourned, Gabrielle walked back to her corner office. It was the very same office Derek had briefly occupied, now entirely stripped of his pretentious modern art, and replaced with her own minimalist, highly functional decor. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The city looked entirely different to her now. It wasn't a place she needed to hide from to protect a fragile, insecure marriage. It was a city she helped shape and build. Her encrypted phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email from her elite legal team. The divorce proceedings were officially finalized. Derek had not contested a single clause. He couldn't afford a lawyer even if he wanted to. The house in Evanston was entirely hers, free and clear. Gabrielle took a deep, steadying breath, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over her. She had spent years intentionally dimming her own light, hiding her brilliance and her massive wealth, all in a desperate, misguided attempt to be loved for who she was, rather than what she had. Derek's ultimate betrayal had been the most painful experience of her life, but it had also been the exact catalyst she needed. He had violently cured her of the illusion that she needed to be small to be happy. She picked up a tablet and began reviewing a new high-stakes tech startup portfolio. She didn't feel bitter. She didn't feel angry. She just felt utterly, beautifully free. In the end, Derek Sterling learned the hardest and most unforgiving lesson of all. True wealth is never measured by the logo on your watch, the price of your suit, or the address on your lease. He traded a loyal, brilliant partner for a hollow, expensive illusion and lost absolutely everything in the process. His blind ambition and arrogance left him bankrupt and alone. Gabrielle, on the other hand, finally stepped out of her own shadow. By releasing the dead weight of a man who could not appreciate her true value, she stepped into her power, claiming both her massive company and her personal freedom. This story serves as a stark reminder that the grass is rarely greener on the other side. Often, it's just painted with a toxic, expensive veneer. Thank you for listening, and remember to look closely at the people who stand by you before you chase a glittering mirage. Glittering mirage. Glittering mirage. Glittering mirage. Glittering mirage. Glittering mirage.